The sun dipped low over the rolling Napa Valley vineyards, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. Clara adjusted the last silver fork on the dining table, her hand steady despite the faint tremor that came with age. The grand estate, worth over $53 million, felt both like a fortress and a cage, filled with memories of her late husband, Henry, and the life they had built together. It was Sunday evening, a tradition Clara had preserved even after Henry's passing. The ritual of dinner was her way of holding the family together. Tonight, however, the air felt heavier, as if the house itself braced for confrontation. Julia arrived with Victor precisely at 7. Their footsteps echoed across the marble floor, sharp and deliberate. Clara immediately noticed the frost in Julia's expression and the calculated tightness in Victor's smile. He kissed Clara's cheek perfunctorily, already scanning the room with the eyes of a man assessing value, not warmth. "Mother," Julia said coolly, removing her coat without waiting for Anna's assistance. Her voice carried the weight of someone rehearsing an announcement rather than greeting family. Clara forced a gentle smile. "Dinner is ready. I thought we could enjoy a quiet evening together." Anna, the loyal housekeeper who had been with the family for decades, brought out the roasted lamb and vegetables. She cast a glance toward Clara, her intuition prickling. She had seen storms gather in this household before, disputes, inheritances, whispered arguments, but tonight, something in Julia's eyes unsettled her. Conversation over dinner was brittle, forced. Victor praised the wine but did so with the air of a man appraising an investment. Julia asked nothing about her mother's health or well-being. The warmth that used to bind them had been replaced by an unspoken agenda. Clara noticed it all but said nothing. She had learned, over years of widowhood, the value of silence, waiting for the truth to reveal itself. And deep in her chest, a quiet dread stirred. The clink of silverware echoed through the grand dining room, each sound sharper than usual, as though the house itself were listening. Clara carved a small piece of lamb, her movements deliberate, waiting for her daughter to break the uneasy silence. It was Julia who finally spoke. She placed her fork down carefully, folded her hands, and looked directly at her mother. Her voice was calm, rehearsed, carrying no hesitation. "Mother," she began, her tone almost businesslike, "Victor and I have been discussing the estate. We believe it's time to sell." Clara's hand froze midway to her glass of wine. Though she remained perfectly composed, her heart clenched. Julia continued smoothly, as though the matter were already settled. "The vineyards, the land, this entire property, it's worth far too much to be left sitting idle. Victor's company is on the brink of major expansion, and with the sale, we could provide the capital needed to secure the future. It's the practical thing to do." Across the table, Victor leaned back in his chair, his smirk faint but confident. He reached for Julia's hand, squeezing it as though to signal triumph. His eyes flicked toward Clara, assessing her reaction with the cold scrutiny of a predator testing his prey. Clara forced her lips into a polite smile, though inside, her chest burned with betrayal. This wasn't just about money. This was her home, her husband's legacy, the life they had built together brick by brick, vine by vine. Anna, silently clearing plates nearby, nearly dropped the serving spoon. She caught Clara's eyes for a fleeting second, her face pale with disbelief. Anna had known Julia since she was a child, and yet this tone, this icy detachment, was unfamiliar, chilling. Clara placed her glass down softly and spoke in an even voice. "So that's why you came tonight, not for dinner, not for family, but for the estate." Her words cut through the room like a blade. Julia flinched, but Victor quickly interjected, his tone dripping with condescension. "Clara, this is not about taking anything from you. It's about progress. You've had your time here. Now it's time to think of the next generation." Clara's eyes met his steadily, her composure unbroken. But deep inside, a seed of resolve began to form. She had seen this coming. And she was ready. Victor leaned forward, his elbows pressing into the polished oak table, his voice rising with irritation. You can't keep holding on to this place forever, Clara. It's wasted potential. Julia and I can turn it into something meaningful, something that will last. Julia nodded quickly, her face strained but obedient, echoing her husband's words. Mother, please. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Victor's company is the future, and the estate is the perfect way to fund it. We're only trying to do what's best. Clara set her knife and fork down with deliberate calmness. She dabbed her lips with her napkin, then placed it neatly on the plate. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then she reached for her leather folder, resting at the sideboard. Her hands were steady, her eyes unwavering. She placed it on the table and slid it toward them. What's this? Victor asked sharply, his suspicion flashing as Julia hesitated. Clara's lips curved into a faint smile. These are the documents you'd been circling around without even knowing. Months ago, I anticipated that ambition, her gaze swept from Victor to Julia, lingering on her daughter's guilty eyes, would eventually outweigh family. So I acted. She opened the folder and revealed the stamped, notarized pages, the deed of the estate, transferred into an irrevocable trust. An irrevocable trust, Clara continued, her tone steady as steel. It cannot be altered, revoked, or contested. The estate, every vine, every brick, every acre, belongs to the trust. And I am the sole beneficiary. Neither of you has any legal claim, now or ever. Victor's face reddened, his jaw tightening as he scanned the pages, his bravado faltering for the first time. Julia's breath caught, her eyes darting between her mother and husband, shame flooding her expression. You planned this, Victor spat, his voice low and venomous. You don't trust your own daughter? Clara leaned back in her chair, her eyes sharp, unflinching. I trust Julia's heart, she said quietly, but I do not trust your influence. Anna, standing in the shadows near the sideboard, felt a rush of relief and admiration. For years, she had witnessed Clara's quiet strength, but tonight it shone like armor. The room crackled with tension. Victor's plans had hit an invisible wall, and for the first time, Clara had revealed her hidden hand. The battle lines were drawn. Victor's hand slammed against the table, rattling the silverware. His carefully constructed mask of charm shattered, replaced by raw frustration. Enough of this charade, he barked, his voice echoing off the high-ceilinged dining room. His eyes burned with desperation as he leaned forward. My company is drowning, Clara. We are weeks, days, from collapse. Investors are pulling out, employees are leaving. Without this estate, without its value, everything I've built will crumble. Julia gasped softly, her face paling. She looked at her husband with a mix of fear and disbelief. Victor, you told me things were stable. Victor ignored her, his gaze locked on Clara. I didn't marry Julia to watch her wallow in mediocrity. I married her because I believed we could build something greater together. But greatness costs money. This estate is just dirt and vines. You sit here clinging to memories while the future slips away. Clara's eyes flashed with fury, though her voice remained calm, every word precise. This estate is not dirt and vines, Victor. It is Henry's life's work, his blood, his sweat. It is the home where Julia was raised, the place where generations of our family grew strong. You call it wasted potential, she leaned forward, her voice sharpened to a blade, but I call it legacy. And I will not sell legacy to patch over your incompetence. Victor's mouth twisted into a sneer. Legacy won't pay debts. Legacy won't keep my company alive. You're so blinded by nostalgia you can't see reality. Reality, Clara shot back, is that your so-called future is built on sand. You gambled and you lost. Do not dare ask me to destroy what Henry built to cover the holes you dug. Julia's hands trembled in her lap. She looked torn between loyalty to her mother and fear of her husband's rage. Victor, maybe we should slow down. Maybe mother is right. Be quiet, Julia. Victor snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. His contempt cut through the air, silencing her instantly. In that moment, Anna, standing silently at the edge of the room, saw the truth plain as day. Victor's veneer of sophistication had crumbled, exposing nothing but arrogance, desperation, and greed. Clara, sitting tall, her eyes unwavering, knew the battle had only just begun, but tonight, Victor had revealed his weakness. He was not a visionary. He was a man drowning, grasping at anything to keep from sinking, even if it meant destroying his wife's family. Julia's tears spilled freely, her voice trembling as she clutched the edge of the table. You've never trusted me, Mother. All my life, you've treated me like a child who couldn't make her own decisions. This estate is just another way to control me. Clara's eyes softened, but her resolve remained. No, Julia. This estate is not about control, it's about preserving your father's legacy, something far greater than either of us. Victor leaned forward, his jaw tight. Enough sentimentality. Julia has every right to her inheritance, and you're denying her future. At that moment, Anna, who had quietly stood by for years, watching the family dynamics unfold, finally stepped in. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. No, Mr. Victor. It's you who's denying Julia a future. I've seen the accounts, the desperation in your calls, the people you owe. You've dragged her into your failures, and if she continues down this path, she'll lose more than her inheritance, she'll lose herself. Julia froze, her sobs quieting. For a moment, doubt flickered across her face as Anna's words sank in. Victor, however, slammed his fist against the table, his pride unwilling to yield. Clara reached out toward her daughter, her voice steady but warm. Julia, you are stronger than this. Don't let his ruin become yours. You still have a choice. The room fell into silence, broken only by Julia's uneven breaths. Torn between loyalty to her husband and the truth spoken by both her mother and Anna, she sat at a crossroads, one that would shape not just her future, but the fate of the family estate. The dining room, once filled with the rich aroma of Clara's Sunday roast, now reeked of tension. Julia sat slumped in her chair, her tear-stained face turned toward the floor. Victor glared at Anna with venom in his eyes, but the housekeeper stood her ground, her hands folded firmly in front of her apron. Anna's voice carried the weight of decades spent silently observing the family's joys and fractures. Julia, I've known you since you were a child. I've seen you doubt yourself when your father praised your brother more, when teachers compared you to others, when you believed every little flaw meant you weren't enough. You've been fighting ghosts your whole life, child. Julia's lip trembled. The words struck deeper than any argument from her mother ever could. Anna stepped closer, her tone softer but unyielding. You chase money because you think it will buy the worth you never felt you had. You cling to men who promise you the world, but what do they give you in return? Pain. Lies. Fear. Love doesn't demand your soul, Julia. And family, true family, never asks you to sell your bloodline for survival. Clara's eyes glistened with silent gratitude. For years, she had tried to reach Julia, but Anna's words now pierced through the hardened shell of resentment and fear. Victor scoffed, his voice sharp. This is ridiculous. You're letting a servant poison your mind. But Julia didn't respond. Instead, her fingers traced the rim of her wine glass, her mind unraveling years of choices. She saw her life in fragments, moments of reaching for approval, for validation, for a sense of worth she could never quite grasp. And she realized, for the first time, that Victor's promises were just another version of the same lie she'd been told all her life. Tears welled again, but these were not the tears of anger. They were the first cracks of awakening, a painful glimpse at a truth she could no longer ignore. The room fell silent, and Julia's whisper barely rose above it. "What have I done?" Anna placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle yet firm. "It's not too late, child. But the choice is yours, and yours alone." For Julia, it was the fragile, trembling beginning of something she had never truly known, freedom from the chains of fear and false promises. Victor's composure cracked into something darker, his polite veneer giving way to raw menace. His voice rose above the silence, sharp as broken glass. "This isn't over. That trust means nothing if I can prove Clara is incompetent. At her age, with her memory slipping, any judge would see she's unfit to handle $53 million. Julia flinched at his words, though she remained silent. Clara, however, did not. She set her fork down carefully, her movements deliberate, her gaze steady as steel. "If you want a war, Victor, you'll find I've been preparing for it long before you ever walked into this house." Her declaration hung heavy in the room. Victor smirked, mistaking her calm for weakness. "You're bluffing. You're a lonely widow, one who clings to old letters and vineyards. You won't stand a chance against me in court." But Clara had anticipated this very moment. For years, she had written in leather-bound journals, chronicling not only her estate's operations but also the changes in Julia's behavior since meeting Victor. She had carefully logged every unsettling rumor she'd heard about Victor's company, missed payments, angry investors, shady partners. And in recent months, sensing his desperation, she had begun documenting even their smallest interactions, his veiled threats, his manipulative charm, his explosive temper. Anna, standing silently in the doorway, knew of these journals. She had often seen Clara late at night at her writing desk, candlelight flickering across her stern face as she wrote with meticulous precision. Clara wasn't just preserving memory, she was building a shield of truth. "I have witnesses," Clara continued, her tone calm, unwavering. "I have records, signatures, even recordings. Do you really think a court will believe you over me, Victor? A man drowning in debt, clawing for money that was never his?" Victor's jaw tightened. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. Julia's gaze darted between her mother and husband, her mind spiraling. She had never seen Clara so fierce, so certain. It was as if Henry's legacy, the vineyard, the estate, the wealth, was not just protected by law, but by Clara's unbreakable will. Victor leaned back, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow. "We'll see who the courts believe, Clara. You're not untouchable." Clara folded her hands neatly, her calm almost chilling. "Neither are you." The table was silent again, except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. But beneath that silence, the battle lines were drawn. Victor had threatened war, and Clara had shown she was ready for it. Victor struck back swiftly and viciously. Within a week, headlines splashed across the local papers and glossy magazines: "Elderly widow unfit to manage Napa estate." Sources claim Clara suffers mental decline. Daughter's husband seeks to protect family fortune. Photographers swarmed the vineyard gates, capturing Clara's every movement as though she were a fragile relic stumbling toward ruin. Commentators on talk shows speculated that she was senile, perhaps manipulated by Anna, her suspiciously loyal housekeeper. The campaign was relentless, a calculated attempt to shatter Clara's credibility before any courtroom battle could begin. Yet Clara remained unshaken. Each morning, she walked the rows of vines with steady steps, the sun glinting on her silver hair, her composure intact. When reporters shouted questions, she answered with dignity: "My husband Henry built this estate with honor. His name, his work, and his family will not be tarnished by lies." Victor's fury only grew. He released doctored statements and invented financial records. He twisted Julia's silence into supposed agreement with him. But the harder he pushed, the more brittle his mask became. Investors who had once whispered about his brilliance now openly questioned his motives. For Julia, the breaking point came in a television interview. She watched her husband sneer into the camera, calling her mother an old woman clinging to fantasies. The word struck her like a knife. Suddenly, years of doubt, denial, and fear fell away. She saw him clearly, not as the ambitious savior she once admired, but as a hollow man desperate to feed his own ego with someone else's legacy. That night, Julia returned to the estate without Victor. Clara and Anna found her standing in the great hall, tears streaming down her face. "Mother," she whispered, voice trembling, "I've been blind. I let him poison me against you. But I see him now, for what he really is." Clara embraced her daughter, not with triumph but with quiet relief. The wound between them would take time to heal, but the first stitch had been made. Victor, stripped of allies and exposed for his deceit, found himself cornered. His company collapsed under scrutiny, and lawsuits from creditors piled high. He left Napa Valley in disgrace, his name reduced to a cautionary tale whispered in wine country circles. One golden afternoon, Clara and Anna sat together on the wide porch overlooking the vineyard. Julia worked quietly nearby, her hands brushing over ledger books, this time not out of greed but out of devotion to the family she had nearly lost. The vines shimmered in the sunlight, rows upon rows stretching toward the horizon. "Henry would be proud," Anna murmured softly. Clara nodded, a serene smile warming her face. "His legacy isn't just this land. It's the strength to endure, the love to forgive, and the wisdom to choose what truly matters." As the evening light painted the valley in gold, Clara knew the storm had passed. What remained was a family reborn, stitched together by truth, loyalty, and love, a future renewed.